Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Silent Fear. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? Here we explore chilling true crime and eerie mysteries, stories that slip between fact and nightmare. Tonight I have another dark tale for you, a journey through the echoes of the uninvited and the disturbing true crime of those who vanished into the very air they breathed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. You finally moved in, haven't you? The keys are heavy in your pocket, cold and sharp, a weight that feels more like a shackle than a prize for your hard-earned credit score. The house is old, the kind of old that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for you to look away so it can rearrange its shadows. You're tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes the edges of your vision blur, making the wallpaper seem to pulse ever so slightly with a rhythm you can't quite catch. You decide to explore that small, square hatch in the ceiling of the hallway, the one the realtor conveniently forgot to mention, probably because sealed crawl space full of existential dread doesn't look great on a Zillow listing. It's a sealed crawl space, caked in a layer of dust so thick it looks like gray velvet, a soft, choking insulation for secrets. When you finally pry it open, the air that rushes out smells of damp earth and something sweet, like rotting apples, or perhaps the ghost of a birthday cake that no one ever got to eat. You shine your flashlight into the void, the beam cutting through the stagnant air. There, in the very center of the crawl space, sits a small, child-sized wooden chair. It's perfectly clean. There isn't a single speck of dust on the seat, though the floor around it is thick with decades of neglect. Even more unsettling are the dust patterns on the floorboards. They show clear drag marks, as if the chair was pulled from the corner to the center only yesterday. You tell yourself it's just the house settling, or perhaps a prank from the previous owners who clearly had too much time and a very specific sense of humor. But who is here to play pranks? You're alone. Or at least, that's what the deed says, and surely the legal system wouldn't lie to you about your own solitude. This brings to mind the case of Ed Gein, the Plainfield ghoul, whose home was a labyrinth of macabre furniture crafted from those who didn't consent to being part of a home decor project. Gein famously kept his mother's room pristine, a shrine of cleanliness in a sea of literal filth and human remains. It makes you wonder about the psychology of preservation. Why keep one small chair clean in a sea of neglect? I suppose if you're looking for a low-maintenance roommate who never steals your milk or complains about your taste in 90s sitcoms, a quiet presence in the attic is a solid choice. It's certainly cheaper than a security system, though the monthly fees might be a bit more. Existential. There is an old superstition, whispered in the backwaters of the Pacific Northwest, about the uninvited guest. It's said that some houses aren't built on land, but on thin places, where the barrier between our world and the next is as porous as a wet paper towel. If you find a piece of furniture moved in a sealed room, the legend says you shouldn't move it back. To move it is to tell the guest they aren't welcome, and an insulted spirit is much louder than a polite one. Researchers still argue whether isolation induces auditory hallucinations or if the environment itself is the catalyst for these perceived presences. Some suggest that infrasound frequencies lower than the human ear can consciously detect can trigger feelings of dread and even visual distortions. It's comforting, isn't it? The idea that your fear is just a vibration in the air. Of course, that doesn't explain why the chair is clean. If you hear a floorboard creak above you tonight, just tell yourself it's the wood expanding. Wood is very dramatic like that, always sighing and moaning about the temperature as if it's the only one suffering. It's also much easier to sleep if you don't think about the fact that your attic has better housekeeping than your living room. Honestly, if there's something living in your walls, I hope it's at least helping with the property taxes. In this economy, even a poltergeist should be pitching in. You close the hatch, but you can't shake the feeling that you've just tucked someone in, and the rhythm of the house continues to mock you as you settle into bed. The silence here isn't empty, it's heavy, like a wet wool blanket that smells of cedar and old rain. It reminds you of another silence, one that lasted for 65 years in Philadelphia. You think about the boy in the box, found in 1957, tucked away in a bassinet box as if he were a discarded toy that someone decided was too broken to keep. For decades, he was just America's unknown child. There is something profoundly disturbing about a human life becoming a question mark that no one wants to answer, a piece of a puzzle that everyone keeps trying to shove under the rug. You lie there wondering how many question marks are currently walking past your window, or perhaps standing just outside the circle of your porch light, waiting for the motion sensor to finally acknowledge them. Criminologists still argue whether the anonymity of the victim was a deliberate choice by the perpetrator or a failure of the social safety net to catch a falling star. It took over half a century to give Joseph Augustus Zarelli his name back. Imagine waiting 65 years for someone to remember who you are. I've waited 20 minutes for a coffee and felt like a martyr. Joseph's patience was truly supernatural. There's a fringe theory popular among the more tinfoil hat-leaning occultists that names have weight. They say that if a child is left unnamed or erased, they become a vessel for something else, a changeling that slips into the vacancy left by the soul. They say these children never really die, they just wait in the quiet places like cardboard boxes or clean attic chairs, waiting for a new name to wear. It's a lovely thought to fall asleep to, isn't it? The idea that identity is just a garment someone else might be trying on in the dark while you sleep. Parenting is hard enough without the threat of supernatural identity theft. Honestly, if a changeling wants to take over my life, they're welcome to it. I hope they enjoy the back pain and the mounting existential dread that comes with a 9 to 5. Here, take my soul, just make sure you pay the electric bill on time and remember that the car makes a funny noise when you turn left. It's the ultimate trade-up. But the boy in the box wasn't a changeling. He was a tragedy. And tragedies have a way of staining the ground they happen on, soaking into the soil until the very grass grows back a different shade of green. You feel a chill in the room, despite the heater humming away like a faithful metal dog. You think about how Joseph was found freshly groomed, his hair cut recently, his fingernails trimmed. Someone cared for him just enough to make him presentable before they threw him away. That's the real horror, isn't it? Not the monster in the woods, but the one who knows how to use a pair of scissors. Researchers still argue whether the boy in the box case remained cold for so long due to a lack of technology or a deliberate wall of silence from a community that knew exactly what happened but decided that some truths are too heavy to carry. It's a sobering thought. The secret is always in the room. It just doesn't have a tongue. Or perhaps it does, and it's just whispering at a frequency you can't hear over the sound of your own heartbeat, which seems to be getting louder the more you try to ignore it. You decide you need a distraction, something to break the loop of thoughts. Maybe a late-night drive. The road is always a good place to outrun a thought, or at least to give it a head start. You pull into a gas station at 3:30 a.m., the witching hour, though these days it's mostly just the "why are these snacks $5 hour?" The fluorescent lights hum with a sickly green flicker, making the pavement look like bruised skin under the gaze of 1,000 unseen insects. You're reaching for the nozzle when you see them. 2 children standing by the edge of the light. They aren't wearing coats, and the night air is biting. They don't have a car. They don't have parents. They just have a request. Can we have a ride home? Our parents are waiting. You look at their eyes, or rather, where their eyes should be. There are no pupils, no irises, just 2 twin pools of ink-black void that seem to draw the light right out of the air. This is the legend of the Black-Eyed Kids, or BEKs. Brian Bethel first reported them in 1996, and since then they've become the door-to-door salesmen of the apocalypse. Sociologists still argue whether the BEK phenomenon represents a modern digital folklore or a collective psychological projection of parental anxiety in an increasingly dangerous world. Personally, I've always found door-to-door salesmen terrifying even when they do have pupils. At least with the Black-Eyed Kids, you know they're looking for your soul and not trying to sell you a multi-level marketing scheme for essential oils. One is a spiritual catastrophe, the other is just a very long Tuesday. I'll take the void over a sales pitch any day. The children don't move. They just stare. There is a superstition that you must never, under any circumstances, invite them in. To say yes is to surrender the threshold of your sanctuary, to let the vacuum of their existence pull the warmth from your home. Some say they are vampires. Others say they are extraterrestrials struggling to maintain a human glamour that is failing at the seams. Whatever they are, they seem to be very bad at picking out a wardrobe. I mean, if you're going to haunt a gas station, at least wear something reflective. Safety first, even for the damned. Researchers still argue whether these encounters are triggered by sleep deprivation hallucinations, common in long-haul truckers and late-night commuters whose brains are desperately trying to fill the silence with something, anything, to keep them awake. It's a convenient explanation. Your brain is just tired, so it paints scary children over the empty spots in the scenery. But as you drive away, watching them shrink in your rearview mirror, you notice they aren't shivering, and the air around them seems to be darker. You remember the clean chair in the attic, the drag marks in the dust. You wonder if those children are looking for a place to sit down, a place where the dust has been cleared away just for them, a sanctuary and a crawl space they can finally call home. You're back home now, the gas station children, a fading blur in your memory, or so you hope, but the idea of an uninvited guest follows you through the front door like a stray dog you can't quite shake. It's a concept that reached its most terrifying conclusion in 1922 on a remote farmstead in Bavaria called Hinterkaifeck. The Gruber family started noticing things, footprints in the snow leading from the woods to the house, but none leading back. A newspaper they didn't buy appearing on the porch like a gift from a stranger. Scratches in the attic that sounded too rhythmic to be rats. They didn't know that for days a killer was living in their walls, eating their food and watching them sleep. He was a shadow that shared their meals and breathed their air, waiting for the right moment to pick up a mattock and end the charade. Historians still argue whether the killer was a neighbor seeking revenge or a transient who viewed the family as mere obstacles in his temporary home. The case remains unsolved, a century-old ghost story made of cold iron and blood. It really puts bad roommates into perspective, doesn't it? You think your friend who never washes their dishes is a nightmare. Try a guy who lives in your ceiling and plans your demise while you're watching the evening news. At least the guy in the ceiling is quiet and doesn't steal your heated blanket. There's a certain level of respect in that kind of commitment to the bit. It's the ultimate rent-free living situation, though the move-out process is a real killer. There is an obscure urban legend from the region about the wit, or shadow people, who inhabit the spaces between the studs of a house. They say that once a shadow person enters your home, they become part of the architecture, a silent support beam for your reality. You don't get rid of them, you just learn to live with the fact that the wall behind your bed has a heartbeat and a very specific set of grievances. Researchers still argue whether the footprints in the snow at Hinterkaifeck were a misinterpretation by the local authorities or a deliberate breadcrumb trail left by a killer who wanted to be noticed, a performance for an audience of one. There is a specific kind of vanity in horror, the need to be seen, even if it's only for a second before the end. You look at the walls of your bedroom. The wallpaper is peeling slightly at the corner, revealing the old plaster beneath. You wonder how much space is actually back there. Just enough for a person, just enough for a mattock. You hear a thud from the hallway. Just the house settling, just the wood expanding, just the guest in the attic making themselves comfortable in that clean, child-sized chair. You try to focus on the sound of the fan, that low, unsettling hum you turned on to drown out the silence. But beneath the fan, there's another sound, a vibration that seems to come from the ground itself, a tectonic secret. It's a low-frequency drone, constant and maddening. Some people call it the hum. In Taos, New Mexico, it's a local legend. Thousands of people hear it, a sound that feels like a truck idling in the driveway, but there is no truck, and the driveway is empty. Acoustic engineers still argue whether the hum is a biological phenomenon within the inner ear or a localized industrial frequency that we've simply tuned into. But for you, tonight, it feels more like a voice. A voice without words, vibrating through the floorboards and into your bones, telling you things you didn't want to know. It reminds you of the Walling-In legends. Stories of people buried alive within the foundations of buildings to ensure the structure would stand for 1,000 years. A human sacrifice for structural integrity, a soul to hold up the ceiling. I've always felt that my house required a sacrifice, but usually it's just my entire paycheck to the plumber who tells me that pipes shouldn't make that sound. If burying someone in the foundation would stop the leaks, I'm not saying I'd do it, but I'd definitely look into the local zoning laws and the price of quick-dry cement. Your Honor, the basement was damp, and the legend said a soul would fix the drainage issues. It's a very practical kind of dark magic, really. The hum gets louder when you close your eyes, a physical weight on your eardrums. It's said that if you listen to it long enough, you start to hear patterns, whispers, names. You think about the uninvited guest and the Hinterkaifeck shadow. If someone were buried in these walls, would they be the ones moving the chairs? Would they be the ones standing at the edge of the gas station light, waiting for someone to offer them a ride back to the foundation? Researchers still argue whether the hum is actually a result of microseismic activity, the earth itself ringing like a bell in a void. But if the earth is a bell, who is ringing it? And why does it sound so much like someone breathing right behind your ear, their breath smelling of wet dirt and old iron? You reach out and touch the wall. It's cold. But for a second, you could swear you felt a pulse. Not your own. A slow, heavy beat, deep within the lath and plaster, the house's own secret heart. The house isn't just a building, it's a body. And you're just a temporary inhabitant of its stomach, waiting to be digested by the silence. You pull your hand away from the wall, the chill lingering on your fingertips. You need a distraction, something grounded in the mundane world of ink and paper. You pick up a piece of mail from your nightstand, a housewarming card from a neighbor you haven't met yet, but it makes you think of the letters sent to 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. In 2014, a family bought their dream home, only to receive letters from someone calling themselves the Watcher. "I am in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming," the letters said, with a tone of possessive authority that makes your skin crawl. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time, they will. The writer claimed their family had been watching the house for decades, a legacy of surveillance. Legal experts still argue whether the letters constituted a criminal threat or an elaborate piece of performance art designed to drive down property values for a hostile takeover. But for the family, it was a living nightmare. They never even moved in. It's the ultimate welcome to the neighborhood gift, isn't it? Forget a fruit basket or a sourdough starter. Give me a cryptic thread about the young blood I brought into the house to feed the architecture. It's so much more personal. I wonder if the Watcher offers a subscription service. For $10 a month, I'll stop telling you about the secrets in your crawl space and the way you look when you're sleeping. It's a niche market, but I think it has potential in the modern gig economy. There is a superstition about the eyes of the house, that certain windows act as lenses for those who have passed away, allowing them to look back into the world of the living. They say if you see a face in an upstairs window of an empty house, you shouldn't look away first. To look away is to admit you're afraid, and fear is a beacon that leads them right to your door. Researchers still argue whether the Watcher letters were a hoax perpetrated by the owners themselves to get out of a bad real estate deal, a desperate attempt to escape a financial ghost. But if it was a hoax, it was a dedicated one, a masterpiece of psychological terror. The toll of being watched is a heavy one, a weight that bends your spine. You find yourself checking the window every few minutes, your reflection looking back at you with wide, frantic eyes. The street is empty. The trees are still, but you can't help but feel that someone, somewhere, is writing a letter about you right now, their pen scratching against the paper like claws. The new occupant is in bed, they might be writing, their handwriting neat and precise. They are listening to the hum. They are thinking about the chair in the attic. They are almost ready for the second coming. You turn over, trying to find a comfortable position, but the bed feels like it's made of stones. On the wall opposite your bed is a mirror. It's an old one, with a heavy gilt frame that looks like it's made of frozen vines, and glass that's slightly warped, giving your reflection a ghostly, elongated look, as if you're being stretched thin by the night. You remember an old superstition your grandmother told you? Her voice a dry whisper. Never look into a mirror in a dark room. They say mirrors are spirit traps, and at night, they don't reflect what's in front of them. They reflect what's behind the reflection, the things that usually stay in the corners. This brings to mind the chilling case of Mary Bell, the 11-year-old girl who, in 1968, committed unspeakable acts in England, a child with the eyes of an old, cold predator. There was something in her eyes, people said, a coldness that didn't belong to a child. It was as if she were looking through people, or perhaps looking at something they couldn't see, a mirror in her own mind. Psychologists still argue whether her behavior was the result of a traumatic upbringing or a biological predisposition to psychopathy, a glitch in the DNA. But when you look at her photos, you see a mirror, a void where a soul should be, reflecting nothing but the dark. I've always avoided mirrors at 3:30 a.m., mostly because I'm not prepared to see the spirit of my own poor life choices staring back at me with judgment. Oh, look, it's the ghost of that pizza I ate at midnight. Truly terrifying and remarkably high in sodium. If I'm going to be haunted by reflection, I'd prefer it to be a well-lit one with a good filter. Vanity is the best defense against the supernatural. If you look good, the ghosts are intimidated. It's a scientific fact I just made up. There is a fringe theory called the strange face illusion. If you stare into a mirror in a dim room for more than a minute, your brain begins to distort your features, a dissociation of the self. Your eyes might melt, your skin might turn gray, or a different face entirely might appear, a face you recognize but haven't seen in this lifetime. Researchers still argue whether this is a result of neural adaptation or a dissociative state triggered by low light. But superstitions say it's the mirror showing you your true face, the one you'll wear when you're no longer among the living, the one the worms will eventually get to know. You glance at the mirror now. The warped glass makes your bedroom look like it's underwater, a drowned room in a drowned house. For a second, you think you see a figure standing in the corner of the room, just behind your shoulder, their hands resting on the back of your head. But when you turn around, there's nothing there. Just the shadows and the peeling wallpaper and the sound of the hum. You turn back to the mirror, and for a heartbeat, your reflection doesn't turn with you. It stays, looking out at the room with a wide, silent smile that reaches all the way to its empty eyes. The smile in the mirror, if it was there at all, fades into the darkness, leaving you with a lingering sense of wrongness. You find your mind wandering to the concept of vanishing. Not dying, but simply ceasing to be, as if you were an erased line in a book. In 1910, a young socialite named Dorothy Arnold walked into a bookstore on Fifth Avenue in New York City, her black dress rustling against the shelves. She bought a book of essays, chatted with a friend about a party, and then walked out into the winter afternoon. She was never seen again. No body was found, no ransom notes, no clues, just a silence that stretched over a century. Researchers still argue whether Dorothy's disappearance was a planned escape from the stifling expectations of high society or a tragic medical mishap covered up by her wealthy family to save their reputation. But the mystery remains a black hole in history, a place where time and identity stop. It's as if the city itself simply swallowed her whole, a concrete whale. I've often thought about pulling a Dorothy Arnold when I see my inbox on a Monday morning and realize I have 12 meetings. Sorry, I can't come to the meeting about the meeting. I've decided to evaporate into the New York City air. Tell the boss I've become a legend and I don't do spreadsheets anymore. It's a very elegant way to handle social anxiety. No goodbyes, just a scent of violets and a century of confusion for everyone you ever knew. There is an urban legend about the Vanishing Lady, a woman who appears in crowded places, only to disappear the moment you look away, leaving only a chill in the air. They say she is a glitch, a remnant of a timeline that no longer exists, a ghost of a possibility. If you follow her, you might find yourself walking through a door that leads to a Fifth Avenue that hasn't existed for 100 years, where the horses are still in the streets and the air smells of coal smoke. Researchers still argue whether these vanishing stories are a form of collective myth-making, a way for us to process the terrifying reality that we are all, in a way, temporary, just ripples in a dark pond. But as you lie in your bed, in your house with the clean attic chair and the hum in the walls, you feel a strange sensation, a lightness in your limbs, as if you too could simply walk out of your life and into a bookstore in 1910, leaving your keys on the nightstand for the next uninvited guest. But then you remember the drag marks in the dust. Dorothy Arnold didn't have someone watching her from the attic, or did she? Perhaps she didn't vanish. Perhaps she was just invited to stay. You shake off the feeling of evaporation, the cold lightness that was beginning to take hold. You need to stay grounded, to feel the weight of your own body. You think about the woods, the deep, dark woods of Pluckley in Kent, England, often cited as the most haunted village in Britain. There is a patch of trees there known as the Screaming Woods. Local legend says that at night the air is filled with the shrieks of those who met their ends beneath the canopy. A highwayman, a monk, a woman who lost her way and her mind. Paranormal investigators still argue whether these vocal anomalies are recorded residual energy or simply wind tunnels created by the local topography and the shape of the ancient trees. But if you've ever been in a forest at night, you know that the wind doesn't usually sound like a human being in agony. The wind doesn't have vocal cords to snap. I've always found that the best way to deal with screaming woods is to simply stay in my house and look at pictures of them on the internet. It's a very simple survival strategy that has worked for me for years. If the trees are screaming, they're probably having a bad day, and I don't want to get involved in their drama. I have enough of my own, mostly involving the fact that I can't find my keys. Oh, the monk is shrieking again. Someone get him a tea and a lozenge and tell him to pipe down. Some of us are trying to sleep. A little bit of British politeness goes a long way with the damned. There is a fringe belief that certain trees, particularly old oaks and yews, can memory map the sounds around them, replaying them centuries later when the atmospheric conditions are just right. It's like a natural vinyl record, spinning in the dark, a history made of vibrations. Researchers still argue whether the Pluckley screams are actually the calls of nocturnal birds, like the barn owl, which has a cry that can sound disturbingly like a woman's scream in the middle of a nightmare. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? Just an owl, just a bird. But then you remember the chair in the attic. Owls don't move furniture to the center of a room. Owls don't leave drag marks in the dust. And as you lie there listening to the hum of your fan, you realize the hum has changed. It's no longer a drone. It's a vibration. A low, rhythmic pulse that sounds almost like a muffled scream coming from deep beneath the floorboards, as if the house itself is trying to tell you where the bodies are buried. The muffled scream, if it wasn't just the fan playing tricks on your tired mind, dies away, leaving you with the history of another predator. Long before Jack the Ripper stalked the fog-choked streets of London, there was a monster in Austin, Texas, a shadow in the heat. In the mid-1880s, the servant girl annihilator struck under the light of the moon. He entered homes while families slept, his footsteps silent on the floorboards, his blade precise and cruel. He was a shadow that didn't just watch, he acted, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. Forensic historians still argue whether the Austin murders were the work of a single serial killer or a localized spree of copycat violence fueled by racial tensions and social unrest. Some even suggest that the killer moved to London and became the Ripper himself, a global export of evil. It's a chilling thought, a evil that travels, a shadow that jumps from one city to another, never finding a place to rest, never being caught by the light. If I were a serial killer in the 1880s, I'd probably be caught immediately because I can't keep a secret and I have terrible stamina. Oh, you liked that murder? I did that. Wait, why are you putting me in handcuffs and taking me to the gallows? I was just looking for feedback. It takes a lot of dedication to be a shadow. I prefer the sunlight and snacks, lifestyle. Much less paperwork, and you don't have to worry about whether your cape is properly ironed for the next Moonlight appearance. There is a legend in Austin about the Moonlight Man, a figure seen leaning against the Moonlight Towers, the massive lighting structures built in the wake of the murders to keep the city bright and the shadows at bay. They say he's still there, standing just outside the circle of light, his hand on the cold metal, waiting for the power to go out. Researchers still argue whether the Moonlight Towers actually reduced crime or if they simply created deeper, darker shadows for predators to hide in. It's the paradox of safety. The more we try to light up the dark, the more we realize how much of it there actually is, tucked away in the corners of our vision. You look at the light from your hallway spilling into your bedroom. It creates a long, sharp shadow of the doorframe that points right at your bed. You watch it, waiting for the shadow to move, for the Moonlight Man to step into your room. You think about the uninvited guest and the watcher. You think about the mattock in the walls of Hinterkaifeck. And then you hear a sound from the kitchen, the sound of a drawer opening, slowly, metal scraping against wood. You freeze, your breath a sharp intake of air that feels like ice. Your heart is hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird in a cage, desperate and small. You tell yourself it was just the house settling, again. But the fear is a cold weight now, a physical presence in the room. You think about Émilie Saget, a French teacher in the 19th century who had a very peculiar problem, a duplication of the self. Her students would see her standing at the front of the classroom, while another, Emily, a silent, translucent double, would appear right next to her, copying her every move. The doppelganger would mimic her movements, or sometimes to stand there staring at the children with empty eyes that seemed to reflect a different world. Neurologists still argue whether doppelganger sightings are caused by seizures in the temporoparietal junction or a breakdown in visual sensory integration, a glitch where the brain perceives its own body in the wrong location. It's a fascinating medical mystery, a ghost in the machine. But for Emily, it was a social catastrophe. She was fired from 19 different schools because having 2 teachers for the price of 1 is apparently disturbing to the parents. Turns out, people don't like it when their child's education comes with a side of existential dread. I can barely handle one of myself. I can't imagine having a double following me around and critiquing my life choices. Who ate the last cookie? It was the other me, the silent, translucent one. She has a real sweet tooth. It's the perfect alibi for any domestic dispute. Although, knowing my luck, my doppelganger would be much more successful and better looking than me. It'd be a constant competition for the spotlight. Oh, the ghost version of me just got a promotion and a date. Typical. I'm just going to sit here and be the real one. There is an old superstition that seeing your doppelganger is an omen of death, a final warning from the universe. It's said that the double is the soul detaching from the body, preparing for the final journey into the dark. If you see yourself in the rearview mirror of the car in the lane next to you, looking back with a knowing smile, you shouldn't wave. To acknowledge the double is to accept the invitation to leave. Researchers still argue whether these sightings are a form of autoscopic hallucination, where a person's sense of self is projected into the external environment. But as you lie in your bed, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the warped mirror again. And for a split second, the reflection isn't lying down, it's sitting up. It's sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at you with a look of profound, silent pity, its hands folded in its lap. You blink, and it's gone. You're alone. But the bed feels heavier, as if someone just sat down next to you, the mattress dipping under an invisible weight. The weight on the bed, real or imagined, makes your breath hitch in your throat, a dry rattle. You find yourself thinking about the most famous smile in true crime history, a grin that never fades. In 1947, the body of Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia, was found in a vacant lot in Los Angeles, her dark hair a contrast to the dry grass. She had been severed at the waist, and her face had been carved into a permanent, macabre grin, a Glasgow smile that spoke of a deep, cinematic cruelty. It was a crime designed to be seen, a final performance staged in the city of dreams where everything is a prop. Biographers still argue whether Elizabeth's aspirations for stardom were the motive for her murder, or merely a tragic backdrop to a random act of savagery by a predator who viewed her as a canvas. The case remains a haunt for Hollywood, a reminder that the dream often has a jagged edge that cuts when you least expect it. Hollywood is a tough town, but severed in a vacant lot is a bit much for a career setback, even by today's standards. I've had some bad auditions where I forgot my lines and tripped over a chair, but at least I walked away with my torso intact. It really puts a bad review into perspective. Oh, you didn't like my performance? At least I don't have a carved-in smile and a permanent residence in a cold file. Though in some networking circles, a permanent fake smile is actually a requirement for entry. There is a legend that the ghost of Elizabeth Short haunts the Biltmore Hotel, where she was last seen, her black dress trailing on the carpet. They say she appears as a woman in a black dress, her face veiled to hide the damage. If you ask her for the time, she'll lift the veil and you'll see the smile that never ends, a void of teeth and shadow. Researchers still argue whether the Black Dahlia case was the work of a surgeon or a skilled butcher, given the precision of the bisection, the clean lines of the work. It's a detail that adds a layer of professional coldness to the crime. It wasn't just violence, it was a craft, a dark art. You think about the servant girl annihilator and the Axeman of New Orleans. You think about the precision of the clean chair in your attic. You realize that horror isn't always chaotic. Sometimes it's very, very organized. It has a plan. It has a seat saved for you at the table. And as you look at the doorway, you see a sliver of black fabric snagged on the frame, just a thread, just a shadow, just a smile in the dark that you can feel more than you can see. You pull the covers up to your chin, trying to hide from the room. The thread on the doorframe is gone now, or maybe it was never there, just a trick of the flickering light. You think about liminal spaces, places that are between one thing and another, neither here nor there. There is an obscure urban legend about a hospital in Chicago that has a third-floor pharmacy. The problem is, the hospital's elevator only lists floors 1, 2, and 4, skipping the 3 as if it were a bad memory. Patients and staff have reported the elevator stopping on a floor that shouldn't exist, the bell chiming for a ghost. The doors open to a dimly lit hallway that smells of antiseptic and old paper, a sterile graveyard. There is a pharmacy counter there, staffed by people in outdated uniforms who never look up from their ledgers. If you try to step out, the doors close immediately, trapping you in the elevator. But the hospital records show that they keep receiving supply orders from the third-floor orders for medicines that haven't been manufactured in 50 years, cures for diseases that have already been forgotten. Urban planners still argue whether these architectural liminal spaces are the result of poor design, structural errors, or if they trigger a specific type of environmental paranoia in the human brain. But some believe that the third floor is where the hospital keeps its memories, the things that didn't go according to plan. A place for the things that weren't supposed to happen, but did. I've spent enough time in waiting rooms to know that hospitals are already portals to a different dimension where time has no meaning and the magazines are all from 1994 and smell like old perfume samples. A phantom pharmacy sounds like a significant improvement over the current healthcare system. At least they're consistent with their inventory and they don't ask for your insurance card. Yes, I'd like some Victorian-era cough syrup and a side of existential dread, please. Charge it to the third floor. There is a superstition among nurses that you should never whistle in a hospital hallway at night. They say it calls the empty rooms, waking the beds that have been vacant for too long. If a room has been empty for too long, it starts to get hungry. It starts to look for someone to fill the space, a heartbeat to warm the sheets. Researchers still argue whether the phantom floor phenomenon is a collective hallucination caused by the high-stress environment of a medical facility where life and death are constantly trading places. But you think about your house. You think about the sealed crawl space. You think about the space between the walls where the shadow might be living. Is your house a liminal space? Is that why the chair is clean? Is that why the hum sounds like a voice calling your name from a floor that doesn't exist? You hear a bell ring. A small silver sound, like a call for service from a ghost. It's coming from the attic, a sharp note in the silence. The bell in the attic is silent now, but its echo lingers in your ears like a persistent itch. It reminds you of a different kind of sound, the sound of jazz, the rhythm of a city on edge. In 1918, New Orleans was held captive by a killer known as the Axeman, a shadow with a heavy blade. He would break into homes, often through a back door or a window, and use the victim's own axe to end their lives, a cruel irony. But his most famous act was a letter published in the newspapers, a challenge to the city. "I am very fond of jazz music," he wrote, the ink dark and confident, "and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose house a jazz band is in full swing at the time I mention." On that night, the city of New Orleans was alive with the sound of trumpets and drums, a frantic concert for survival. No one was killed that night. Criminologists still argue whether the Axeman letters were authentic warnings from a musical madman or a cruel hoax perpetrated by local journalists to sell papers to a terrified public. It's the most aggressive marketing campaign for jazz in history. Listen to this saxophone or I'll use your own axe on you. It's certainly more effective than a radio ad or a billboard. I wonder if the Axeman had a favorite subgenre. I like bebop, but if you play smooth jazz, you're definitely on the list for a midnight visit. He was a man of culture, in the most terrifying way possible, a critic with a blade. There is a legend that the Axeman was a demon, a visitor who could only be appeased by the specific vibration of a jazz ensemble, a frequency that harmonized with his own dark soul. They say he didn't just kill, he collected spirits, looking for souls that could hit a high C and hold it for eternity. Researchers still argue whether the Axeman was actually a series of unrelated crimes that were linked together by a panicked public and a sensationalist press looking for a story. But the fear was real. The music was real. You look at your phone, the screen glowing in the dark. You think about playing some music just in case. But then you remember, the Axeman liked the sound of the house being full of life. He liked the vibration of the living. And your house is already vibrating. The hum is loud now, a physical presence in the room. It's rhythmic. It's almost melodic. Like a jazz band playing deep, deep underground, their notes rising through the soil and into your bed. And then you hear it. A heavy thud in the hallway. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Like an axe, or a chair, or a body. The dragging sound stops just outside your bedroom door, the silence that follows being absolute and crushing. You don't breathe. You don't move. You are a statue made of fear and cold sweat, your eyes fixed on the door handle. You think about everything we've talked about tonight. The clean chair in the attic that waits for its guest. Joseph Zarelli's anonymous grave and the name he finally found. The black-eyed children at the gas station who just wanted a ride home. The shadow in the Hinterkaifeck walls that shared a home with its victims. The watcher's letters and the young blood in the walls. The mirror that smiles when you don't. You realize that these aren't just stories. They are connections, a web of uninvited guests that has been spinning around you since the moment you picked up those keys and stepped across the threshold. Sleep researchers still argue whether sleep paralysis is a bridge between the dream state and reality or a purely physiological glitch in the REM cycle, a locking of the muscles. But as you lie there, unable to move, you feel a cold hand on your forehead, the fingers long and thin. It feels like the dust in the crawl space, dry and ancient, smelling of rotting apples and old paper. I've always said that the best way to avoid a final breath is to just stay awake forever and consume massive amounts of caffeine. It's a flawless plan, except for the hallucinations and the irritability and the heart palpitations. But honestly, if a ghost is going to haunt me, I hope it's at least interesting and has some good stories to tell. Oh, you're the Axeman. Can you play the piano? No. Then what are you even doing here in my hallway? Shoo. A little bit of standards goes a long way in the afterlife. There is a phenomenon called the gazing, the feeling of being watched when no one is there. They say it's a remnant of our evolutionary past, a predator detection system built into our brains to keep us from being lunch. But what if the predator is already in the room? What if the predator is the room and the walls are just its teeth? Researchers still argue whether the sensation of a presence is caused by electrical stimulation of the brain's angular gyrus, a misfiring of the self-location system. But as you look toward the foot of your bed, you see it, the small, child-sized chair. It's sitting there, perfectly clean, in the middle of your carpet, the drag marks leading right to your feet. And sitting in the chair is a figure. It's veiled in black lace. It's wearing a black dress that seems to drink the light. And it's leaning forward as if to tell you a secret that will change you forever. Are you comfortable? It whispers. The voice is yours, every inflection, every pause. But it's not coming from your throat, it's coming from the chair. Every story we've told tonight is currently standing right outside your peripheral vision, waiting for you to blink. They are the drag marks in your mind. They are the hum in your bones. And as you finally close your eyes, because you could no longer keep them open, you realize that the uninvited guest didn't break in. You let them in. You listened to the whispers until they became your own. Good night. Sleep well, if you can.